Hello and welcome to the Reviews Brothers, where we are looking for hidden gems on the PS2, starting with every letter of the alphabet. There are a fair few for the letter W, and actually looking at it now, I didn't realise I had so many licensed games, but hey, it just goes to prove that they're not all bad. Anyway, you know the drill by now. These might not be the best games out there, but there might be ones you want to check out. And if this is your first time watching, make sure you go back and watch all the other letters in the series. But now, how about I shut up, you press that subscribe button, and we take a look at some games. Let's start with some racing this time round with Wacky Races starring Dastardley and Muttley, because apparently none of the other characters matter. This is a racing game based on the classic Hanna-Barbera cartoon that sees a bunch of wacky racers take part in some wacky races all over the world. It's basically a TV show that's destined to be made into video games. There's no real story, it's a racing game, but you do have a few game modes. You've got your standard race where you can choose to do single races, cups or time trials. Here you just need to choose your racer and the ones you want to do, and off you go. And I should really mention the racers. They're all from the TV show, of course, but you will need to unlock some of them before you get to play as them. You've got Dick Dastardly, who is one of the locked characters, the Anthill Mob, Penelope Pitstop, the Gruesome Twosome, the Slag Brothers, and all the others. And yep, they each have their own stats when it comes to speed, handling and acceleration, so they do feel quite different to one another. Each racer also has their own set of weapons to use, which at the start of each race you can choose which buttons these are assigned to, which is pretty cool. You tend to get one offensive attack, basically a projectile, one defensive, so either something you drop behind you or maybe a shield, and a boost. These attacks each cost money to use, and the different ones cost different amounts, which is why you'll find loads of coins scattered around the racetrack that you'll need to collect. The courses themselves have a great variety. They're all sort of based on the various characters, and there is a surprising amount of them. You'll race on snow plains, haunted houses, Wild West canyons, shipyards and so on, and they're all fairly long courses, and some of them are actually quite simple, whereas others are damn tough with hairpin bends all over the place that you'll need to navigate. I will tell you now that you won't be winning consistently here without a bit of practice and learning some of the tracks. It is perfectly doable though. What's also cool is that there's an adventure mode. This is where you unlock most of the extra content. You've got a hub world that you can drive around and choose any of the tracks that you've unlocked, where you're given various tasks and objectives as well as the races themselves. Completing all these will earn you stars, and you need a certain amount of stars to unlock other challenges for the map you're on, as well as opening up new courses and, if you're lucky, new characters. The graphics here are really good, with awesome cel-shaded look to everything. All the characters are represented very well and the animation is super smooth. The variety in stages is also very good, and you're never looking at the same thing for too long. The controls here are also surprisingly good. It's all very responsive, though you really will have to get used to drifting for a lot of the tracks if you want to get anywhere. But once you've learned a few of them, you'll be fine. Overall, I was actually very surprised at how much I enjoyed this game. I thought it'd be pretty janky, but it's a solid enough racer that would be great with friends. It's not going to topple the likes of Mario Kart, of course, but it's still solid and a challenging entry into the kart racer genre. Way of the Samurai from Spike is an interesting 3D action-adventure game. The plot is actually quite a deep one, but essentially you're a ronin guy who's wandering around and happens upon a remote village where you break up a fight. Turns out you've just stepped into the middle of a war between 3 rival clans. There's also several neutral civilians in the town just trying to survive. The story here really does play a huge part of the game though, as you'll meet quite a lot of characters and be involved in a lot of conversations. What's interesting though is that the conversations are actually very important here, and you can even talk to people during your fights, and you really need to keep an eye on what you say to people depending on what you want to do. As you play, you actually have the opportunity to join any of these 3 factions and become one of their soldiers, working your way up the ranks. Or you can choose to stay a neutral, where you can attempt to help solve the conflict peacefully or with your sword. The 3 factions each have their own various views and values and ways of doing things, so you might decide that you like one faction more and join their group. They aren't all just murderous bastards. You have a smallish open world that you can explore, which consists of a small town, a train station, an iron foundry and the hideouts of the factions. You can explore freely, and you'll often come across the other people just having fights between themselves. It's up to you if you get involved most of the time, and if you haven't caused too much trouble, then generally people will just leave you alone. As you explore, you'll meet plenty of other people and you can choose how to respond to them, often basically deciding if you want to fight them or if they become your friend. You'll also meet some women that you might want to start a romance with. And you will of course need to do a fair bit of fighting, and I really like the combat here. It's your usual hack and slash affair with a weak and strong attack, but you can create your own combos which are then saved, which is something I really enjoyed, and it tells you when you've made a new one. You want to do a lot of blocking and parrying on to take on tougher enemies, and there's bosses who are much tougher and sometimes bring a gun to a sword fight, but that's nothing you can't handle. Deciding on who to fight and who to leave alone can sometimes be tricky, as can the decisions you make, as you don't always get the outcome that you'd expect from your choices. But something that's really interesting is that you can choose to just bugger off and leave the town at any point, ending the game. Of course, you will get a few different endings depending on what you've done during your playtime. Sometimes absolutely nothing happens, but sometimes you might have caused innocent people to be killed because you were a dick to someone. It really is quite interesting, and it means you can literally finish the game in about 15 minutes if you want to, but then you will want to go back and see how all your other choices make a difference, and you can spend hours on a playthrough. It's a really interesting concept. It looks fine, the style reminds me of Shenmue, but a more budget one, and it does look like a budget game with simple locations and character models, but it's certainly not a bad looking game. I haven't really played anything like this before, and I have since found out that it has a few sequels that I'm definitely interested in checking out, and you should too. Fighting game time now with World Heroes Anthology, a collection of 4 World Heroes games. Now I will say this is a series that I've really never played, but I definitely had fun playing all the games here. It's a daft story where there's a time machine that's been made and it's used to travel through time to find the strongest fighters from across the world through various different time periods, which is actually a pretty cool idea, but it's a fighting game so the story doesn't really matter. Depending on the game, you have between 8 and 18 characters to choose from, each from various times and locations with their own fighting styles and maybe even a weapon. You have sword-wielding knights, Attila the Hun-style warlords, mudmen people, who I'm sure is out of Metal Slug, and there's samurai and even just your average kung fu people. But the roster is a good one, and every game has the usual new additions, which is always welcome. All the battles here are one-on-one, and you do have the option of playing through the arcade mode or deathmatch mode. Arcade is just that, you fight the roster of other characters in a series of best of 3 matches, except in the 4th game where you actually fight a team of opponents 1 round each. That's pretty cool. As it's an SNK game, the fighting is solid. You've got the usual weak, medium and strong attack buttons which do a variety of kicks and punches depending on what you're doing with the joystick at the time, and there are a load of special moves here for you to learn as well. Thankfully, you can check out a move list in the pause menu, and you really will want to do this as the computer isn't messing around here. These are ports of the arcade games and it shows. Even on the lowest difficulty, I was having real trouble and got my ass kicked a hell of a lot until I did learn a few moves with a couple of characters, as well as what the other characters did to attack. Some are quite aggressive, whereas others are more reactive to what you're doing, and each one has a certain way that you'll want to fight back. The deathmatch mode is still basically just your arcade mode, but here you have spiked walls at the end of each arena that you can hit your opponents into, meaning that the fights are more about attacking as you can't back away too much, or you'll get yourself stabbed. As with all these compilations, it's always fun to play them in order to see the changes that are made. Early games don't have super moves which are incorporated into later releases, and the graphics, while never getting a massive upgrade, are cleaned up a bit in each release. And speaking of the graphics, they're good. These are ports of old arcade games, keep in mind. It's all 2D sprites and they look great with some nice animation, but they're never exactly pushing the hardware, but they're definitely more 32-bit than 16-bit. And the controls here are just as good, they're very responsive and it's easy to pull off special moves consistently. As always, playing this with a friend would be great fun, and I'm glad I've had a proper go with the series now. I kind of always ignored it, thinking it was just a crappy Street Fighter clone, but that's not really the case. They are very solid fighting games that I do recommend trying out. Enough 2D nonsense, here is Whiplash, a 3D platform game from Crystal Dynamics. In this wacky platformer you play as 2 animals, Spanx the weasel and Redmond who is a rabbit. Both of you are animals that are trapped in a horrible animal testing lab where you've been mistreated and had all sorts of experiments done on you. What the gross humans didn't count on though is that their testing made you smart, strong, fast and almost invincible. Once you realise this, you escape, but as you are being tested on, you're both tethered together, meaning one can't go anywhere without the other. The aim of the game is to explore labs, rescue other animals, and cause as much destruction as you possibly can before you escape. It's a plot and premise that I can really get behind. The game is a 3D platformer, and you're given a variety of missions as you explore the levels. These vary from destroying certain things, needing to find a way to get into locked doors, finding items, rescuing animals, defeating bosses, and so on. There is a good amount in here, and it's all very well done. Having two characters also doesn't make controlling this one any harder. You actually only play as Spanx the Weasel for the most part, and Redmond is attached to you with handcuffs, and is just sort of dragged around, which is actually very funny a lot of the time. But don't worry, it's established early on that he is invulnerable and he can't feel pain. This becomes a big part of the game actually, as to attack, you just swing him around like a mace, hitting enemies. You'll also use him where there are hazards like fire, electricity and so on, as he can be thrown into the hazards and come out without a scratch. Sadly, he's not very bright, so often needs Spanx to give him a hefty nudge. For example, if you need to stop a cog from turning to break a machine, you just have to shove Redmond in there. It's pretty fun. The game is broken into levels and you can pause the game to see your objectives as well as the items and animals that you need to rescue and collect. But you don't have to get them all, though part of you will kind of want to. What's cool is that usually when you do rescue the animals, they'll give you new abilities or teach you something related to their creature. For example, rescuing the owl lets you learn how to glide. Sometimes the animals actually help you, like early on you rescue a bunch of monkeys, and by doing this they start to attack all the guards, leaving you just to potter around and collect everything while they deal with the enemies. Breaking stuff is also a big part of the game. A lot of the objectives revolve around causing as much destruction as possible, and at the end of every level you're told how much you have cost the company. Almost everything you see is breakable as well. All the glass, some walls, toilets, things on tables, you'll want to try to smash everything you can, partly because it's just fun to do. In terms of enemies, you mainly have to deal with the complex security. These come in a few varieties, from standard guards to gun-wielding men that hunt you down. There's also a few different robots to smash up, and it's fun to fight them, and your characters both level up as you play, opening up new attacks and special moves to clear out rooms. You never actually die though. Instead, you're just recaptured. But instead of having extra lives, you find keys. The keys unlock the cage that you're shoved into when you lose all your health. So, as long as you've got a key, you can escape and carry on your adventure. Run out of keys and you're stuck for good. Thankfully, there are also a good amount of checkpoints. Graphically, the game looks excellent. I really like the cartoon style and the characters and animation are all done very well. It runs super smooth, and while I would have liked a bit more variety in locations, it was always cool to see what was coming up, and it really has a great sense of humour. The sound is also excellent, and there's a narrator talking about what's going on and giving hints. There's also dialogue which actually made me chuckle a few times. The only problem I really had was the camera, which is fine for the most part, but can sometimes be hard to control and get to do what you want it to, and I did feel that it was a little too close to your characters quite a lot of the time. But it is perfectly manageable, and I had a really great time playing this one. I also have it on the original Xbox, but I haven't tried that version yet. Either way, this one is highly recommended. Another 3D platform game now with Woody Woodpecker Escape from Buzzard Park. This is a budget title that genuinely surprised me with how well it was made. You are Woody, and the evil Buzz Buzzard has decided to kidnap your niece and nephew and won't give them back unless you pay a crazy ransom. Woody does not negotiate with terrorists though, so heads to Buzz's amusement park where he lives and is holding the kids and explores the levels, pecking everyone inside to death until you get the kids back. You've got a few themed worlds to play through, based on theme park sort of things. There's a space world, a pirate world, a horror world, and that's it. There's only 3 worlds, but each one does have a few levels within, and your aim really is just to get to the end, which opens up the next level. There are a few things to collect in each level, mainly little W icons. Collecting these gives you a health boost, and there's 200 to get in each level. You can also find extra lives here, and actually the game is pretty generous with them, and I didn't find too many times when I was running low. There are enemies everywhere as well, and while a lot of them do look different, you'll probably find that there's actually just a few basic reskins and they have the same basic movement and attacks, but that's alright. To fight them, you use your deadly sharp beak, stabbing them to death. You can charge for a more powerful attack as well, and there's a special attack you can collect which makes you dive bomb into the ground, knocking everyone out nearby. The combat is a little tricky though, thanks to some dodgy collision detection and the fact that the enemies will hit you without warning when you're too close, so make sure you attack slightly before you think you need to, or even better, if you use the jump attack, this helps you avoid their attacks as well. You also have a few other moves. You can run, jump, and being a woodpecker, you can peck at certain surfaces which basically lets you climb them. This is easy to do and comes in handy quite often. There's also things you can do in levels, like interacting with cannons which will fire you out and you can ride on the ball, just like Toby Von Doom. But unlike him, you have to jump off before it blows, otherwise you'll die. In fact, that's something that's a bit of a pain in this game. You do have a health bar, but there's also a whole load of instant deaths, like being hit with a cannon, or walking into electric fences, or touching water, and so on. In fact, it's most environmental hazards that kill you in one hit, but not all of them, and you won't know what will kill you and sometimes even what will hurt you until you find out the hard way. Oh well, at least there's plenty of lives. What's cool though is that the levels do offer different playstyles, often switching from a 3D platform game to a 2.5D one. These bits are good fun and a nice way to break up the levels, which can be quite long, taking between 10 and 20 minutes each to complete, though the game overall isn't very long and can be beaten in about 3 hours. Another thing that surprised me is it looks pretty damn good. It's cel shaded, which always helps, but the animation and control here are both really smooth and responsive. Everything is bright and colourful, though a little basic, being a budget game. But really, it was way better than I expected. And as mentioned, their controls here are pretty good as well. They aren't perfect, but the game usually does what you want it to. The biggest issue though is the camera, which you can't even control directly. You have a button to centre it behind you, but you can't control it with the analog sticks at all, which is criminal really. But it's a small problem in what is really a fun platform game, with some good variety in levels, decent control and nice gameplay. There is a bit of jank, but nowhere near the level you'd expect from a game like this. Give it a go if you can. If you want a bit more violence, then maybe World War Z, Ironstorm 1916 to 1964 is what you're after. This is a first-person shooter from Rebellion, who actually makes some really great shooters, including Dread vs Death, Alien vs Predator 2000, and the Sniper Elite series, which is still going today. This game is set in an alternate timeline, 1964, where World War I is still raging and everyone involved is getting more and more advanced tech and weaponry for the battle. You play as a soldier who has to do soldier things. You've got a bunch of missions to play through that will see you make your way through trenches, fighting waves of enemy soldiers as you try to infiltrate enemy bases, destroy gun placements and take down their commanders and generals, secure safe houses and so on. While the setting and gameplay isn't exactly original, it is still done very well and is a solid shooter. At the start of each level you're told what you need to do and then you're basically left alone to do it. Though the game is fairly linear, it is reminiscent of games like GoldenEye on the N64, where you've got a few objectives to complete in some medium-sized sandbox levels, and as long as you get them done, you can pretty much explore freely. Of course, the meat of most FPS games are the weapons, and I'm happy to say you get a good selection here. There's pistols, shotguns, sniper rifles, assault rifles, flamethrowers, rocket launchers, grenade launchers, and so on, and they're all good fun to use. The actual shooting is very well done, feeling responsive and chunky, if you know what I mean. The guns all pack a punch, and while this isn't a particularly gory game, you can feel it when you blast enemies with your guns. There aren't a whole load of enemy types, mostly just the same sort of soldiers but with various different weapons, but that makes sense in a war game really. Some are tougher than others though, and there is plenty of ammo all over the place, so you can blow them to bits. The actual level settings are cool, there's lots of bunkers early on, and you have to storm enemy bases, explore frozen battlefields, and make your way through abandoned towns, and then even more enemy bases. There's a lot of cramped corridors here, and it can be a little claustrophobic at times, but hey, that's what the shotgun is for. It can be challenging as well, with a fair few enemies on screen, and you can't take too much of a beating, so make sure you stick near cover when you can, so you can hide. Turns out being shot hurts. There are a good amount of checkpoints though, and none of the levels are too long that you'll be replaying for hours. In fact, the game on the whole is pretty short, and you'll probably be able to get through it in just a couple of hours, but that's alright with me. I actually prefer shorter games these days. The controls did take a while to get used to for me. They're usually what you'd expect for the most part, but changing weapons is needlessly complicated with a combination of the D-pad and shoulder buttons needed. I would often try to switch weapons, but just go back to the one I was already using. And also, reloading is done with the R2 button, which just doesn't feel right. To be fair though, you might be able to change this, I forgot to check. It all looks good though, with some great details all over the place, like flags and things catching fire in the middle of gunfights. Also, you often have soldiers with you, so you get to see some cool battles and bodies flying all over the place. And you can ignore the dodgy white line on the screen, that's the emulation. Overall, this is a pretty solid first-person shooter that doesn't really do anything particularly groundbreaking, but it's very well made and worth playing through as it won't take up too much of your time. It's also very cheap.
Guess who's back? Back again. Bailey's back. Tell the internet. Guess who's back? Guess who's back? Guess who's... Well, you get the point. Worms. Ladies and gents, this is the game that you've been waiting for. Worms. Little pink things engaging in the fair of war. Hello Patreons, subscribers and those soon to be subscribers. It's me, Beltbuckle B, talking to you about Worms 3D. Worms 3D was released many years ago on the PlayStation 2 and probably other consoles and personal computers, and is a Worms game. If you haven't played Worms or don't know what it's about, here goes. Worms started out as a two-dimensional side-on turn-based shooter of sorts, as teams of worms armed to the teeth go about killing other teams of worms in cold-blooded warfare. You don't need to have played any of the previous iterations, our storyline isn't a thing, at least not in the games I've played, so feel free just to jump in with this one as your first attempt, although you should definitely play some of the other versions. Worms 3D, as the title should help to indicate, is Worms' foray into the third dimension, with varying success. The game is very much the same as its 2D variants, but you can now walk, jump, punch and shoot in all directions. I found it tricky at times, especially when trying to get close to the edge of the level you are travelling on to get a clear aim at an enemy, or the best chance of leaping to success. Some weapons are easy to handle, such as the fire punch, an uppercut, shotgun, dynamite and airstrikes, but others require a significant amount of trial and error, or skill, to ensure the correct power and trajectory, as some weapons are affected by wind and gravity. Depending on the weapons utilised, you'll not only take chunks out of your opponent, but also the landscape around it, which is very satisfying, especially if in doing so means the worm you hit then falls to the ground that once was below it and drowns, causing an instant KO. Replayability comes in the form of multiple game types, and almost infinite combinations of landscapes, enemies and weapon lists. You can play, and should play, the tutorials, a tiny bit dragged out but necessary to understand the full capability of your worm and the weapons and utilities to choose from. Next you can work your way through solo campaigns, as you have set tasks ahead of you, all of which involve worm warfare of course, but may involve differing missions such as collecting items. Then maybe try a splash of challenges, set scenarios testing how good, and mostly how quickly, you can kill worms, targets, and definitely other things. And then it's off to quick matches, 1 versus 1, human versus computer, or multiplayer matches where you can choose up to 3 opponents, human or AI, and kill the heckings out of each other. I love Worms. Worms 3D, for me, isn't as good as its two-dimensional cousins, but it's still lots of fun, and whilst playing on your own is limited, if you are lucky enough to have a bunch of chums, then grab some controllers, beverages and snacks and destroy each other. Thank you so much for listening to me waffle. Check out Beltbuckle Bill 333 for more Triple B gaming content, and now back to your regular programming.
Here's one I bet you haven't played. It's Super World Police from Jalico. This is one of those super budget games that is really basic but somehow really fun to play. The story here is that a new drug has been created and is being sold in Japan and America. You get to choose to play as either a Japanese police or the American police as you wage war on the criminals supplying the drug and try to get it off the streets. The entire thing is a driving game, and it really reminds me of an updated version of things like Road Blaster or Sister Go Heat. Gameplay is super simple. In every level you choose from any of the vehicles that you've unlocked, and then you've got a time limit to race on the highways, which the criminals are conveniently always using to catch up with them. Once you're close enough to the target, you have a couple of options depending on what the game wants you to do. You'll either have to just stay close to them and lure them to a roadblock, or you might have to ram them till they explode, or if they're particularly dangerous you can use the variety of guns you unlock to blow them to bits. What's cool is that as you play you unlock new vehicles to use as well as new team members and extra weapons. You can have up to 5 people on your team, and they each have different stats in terms of how aggressive they are, how much they work in a team, their speed, attack and so on, and this is on top of the various stats that each of the vehicles have as well. Your team is fully customizable, so you can choose who's in it as well as the vehicles they drive and the weapons equipped on their vehicles. This is all done through some pretty clunky menus, but it won't take too long to get used to how it all works. You can also select the formations that you use, so depending on the mission you might want everyone to be in a row or sometimes just in a V formation and so on. It's pretty cool. There's a fair amount of story here, with twists and turns happening in between the levels. These are great to watch, even though they're just still images, but thanks to the awful voice acting, they're kind of so bad they're good. The actual levels here, no matter if you're in Japan or America, are all basically playing the same. You just have to drive straight forward, avoiding any traffic or hazards on the road so you can reach the perp in time. The only things that change are the number of things on the road, which gets more and more as you play to make it harder. Also, the target vehicles do get much stronger, starting out unarmed, but by the end of the game they're throwing unlimited grenades at you. Thankfully, you get a range of machine guns and rockets and things that you can unlock and equip to help you out. Some have unlimited ammo, but the really powerful ones have limited use and can't be refilled during a level, so make every shot count. The timer gets shorter and shorter each mission as well, really upping the difficulty. You can save between levels though, so you never have to go back too far. The game isn't really a looker either, and you can really tell it's a budget game with its basic car models and crazy amount of scenery pop-in. The controls are good though, you only have to move forward, so steering isn't really an issue, and the game runs at a smooth frame rate. This is one of those games that I really expected to be awful, but actually found quite fun and hard to put down. It is cheap though, and worth the low price for a bit of cheesy fun. Some more licensed fun now with Wallace and Gromit in Project Zoo, a 3D platform game based on the awesome Aardman animations. The evil penguin Feathers McGraw from the Wrong Trousers movie is back, and this time he's taken over a zoo and captured all of the animals within it. Though surely if they're in a zoo they're already captured. Oh well, let's not argue semantics. Some of the animals there are working for him, but not out of choice, and others are just put in small cages for some reason. Either way, Wallace and his trusty dog companion Gromit aren't standing for it and head to the zoo to rescue the animals and stop Feathers once and for all. Your adventure sees you going through all these zoo exhibitions and worlds like jungles, deserts, underground places and so on, basically your usual platform fare. Each world has a load of things for you to collect to open up the next one, as well as having a bunch of animals to rescue. You only actually control Gromit here, which is fine as he's always the sensible character anyway, while Wallace does his usual bumbling around and accidentally being useful. It's actually very funny. Gromit can run, jump, climb, swing from things and punch and kick to defeat enemies. Your main aim is to find tools and nuts and bolts which you'll give to Wallace so he can create inventions as well as fix the various broken machinery in the levels that you'll need to progress. This is a nice concept and actually something that fits really nicely into their world. Finding the nuts and bolts will let Wallace repair things in levels, so you can use things like buttons and levers to open doors or raise and lower bridges, that sort of thing. Finding the tools lets Wallace create new weapons, like a banana gun or jump boots and even a gyrocopter. There's also coins in each level which, if you collect them, will unlock bonuses. The levels are pretty large, and something I can't decide if it's a good thing or not is that you get very little in the way of hints and tips as to what you need to do and where you need to go, and you're mostly left to just explore and experiment to figure things out. This can mean that you get stuck a lot, but also when you do beat a puzzle you feel pretty good about yourself. Now there are hints which come in the form of information boxes in the zoo. Press one of these and it will give you a little clue, but you still have to explore to find them. But if you are someone who likes to explore, you'll love it. There's buttons and targets all over the place, and shooting or activating these will find hidden coins, and there's plenty of tricky platforming sections that lead to hidden paths and items. There actually really is quite a lot here, and the levels are massive and varied. There's enemies, mainly in the form of evil robots and contraptions that Feathers McGraw has made, and there's even boss fights, and the combat is fine. You just have to hammer the attack button and you'll do well enough. It's definitely not a main focus of the game though, that is all about exploration and puzzle solving. Graphically, I really like how it looks. They've absolutely nailed the look of the animation, and the game is packed with humour and character. Gromit even looks at the camera as he runs past it, something he often does in the animations. All the other animals look just like you'd expect from Aardman, and I think this is as close as they could probably get to the look of the series on this generation of console. And yes, they have Peter Sallis, the actual voice actor, portraying Wallace. Anything else probably wouldn't have been okay in my book, and he does a fantastic job as always, really making Wallace the lovable goof that he is. I originally bought this game on the GameCube, and I also have it for the Xbox. It's a very solid game, which I might be biased because I just love Wallace and Gromit, but it is good fun. The levels can be confusing and the camera can cause issues at times, and also the controls can be a bit slippery, but none of it is bad enough to really cause too much of an issue. You get unlimited lives and there's plenty of checkpoints, so you never go too far back. This really is another fun 3D platform game that I do recommend checking out, especially if you have even a passing interest in the cartoons. And finally for today, here is Wall-E, another licensed game based on the awesome Pixar movie. You are Wall-E, a robot made to pick up rubbish, or trash if that's what you want to call it. You're on Earth and you spend your time picking up crap and making it to nice neat cubes when suddenly a sexy robot girl appears. You follow her like any good creep does, and you get into all sorts of mischief. You'll eventually end up on a massive spaceship with big fat earthlings on it, and even more mischief happens. The game is broken into a surprising amount of levels, each of which goes on for quite a while. It's basically a puzzle platform game, and it actually does it incredibly well. In fact, I should mention that Ms. Smith6967 mentioned this game in the comments of my last video, which is what made me check it out. See, I do listen. And I'm very glad that it was mentioned, as it's a really fun game. The levels just really need you to get to the end of them, but to do this you'll need to complete a lot of puzzles and objectives. Being a funky robot, you've got a few abilities. You can move around pretty fast and you have a little jump, which isn't the best, but that's because you're made of metal. You can pick up and throw trash cubes, which you'll need to do a lot to destroy obstacles, hit switches and do other such video game things. You also have your laser, which you can use to destroy certain things, activate other switches, and so on. Scattered around the levels you'll find a number of boxes of various colours. These contain vials that you need to collect. These are what restore some of your laser powers if they're red, and then there's the blue ones which are needed to activate certain doors or security panels. When you get to a door it'll tell you how many vials you need, and often there's exactly that many in the location you're in, so you just need to explore and smash all the boxes in order to collect them and activate that panel. These panels are always little mini-games. Some are timing based where you have to press buttons in a rhythm, some are memory games like Simon Says, and some are just simple logic puzzles. They're never too tricky and the game is clearly aimed at a younger audience. There's a fair bit of platforming to do. Thankfully Wally controls well and moves fast, though he can be a bit clunky. This could be a deliberate design as he is a robot rather than an athlete or fat plumber, and it does mean you can fall off ledges more than you'd like to, but it's rare that you don't get plenty of chances to try again. And the platforming bits can actually be fun, often with what is essentially a mini racetrack for you to navigate, needing to jump over obstacles or slide underneath them. I like these bits, and Wally does get some good speed. As you're a robot, you have a battery, which is essentially your health. This can drain slowly, but you have solar panels, so if you find a sunspot, just stay there for a few seconds and you'll recharge. You also have a radar thing that you can use to find hidden items in levels. These aren't compulsory, but are things like toys or silly household items, and you get a cool little cutscene when you find them, showing Wally playing with them. I really like these bits. Graphically, the game really is excellent. It's genuinely very impressive for the PS2. There's a ton of detail everywhere, and the animation is incredible, really nailing the look of the movie. There are cutscenes, but these use the in-game graphics and not movie clips, and they also look really good and are fun to watch, which is just as well as you can't skip any of them. This really is an impressive game. It's great fun, a good challenge, and it looks fantastic. It was also released on the next generation of consoles, and I think I'm actually going to pick this up on the Xbox 360 just because it will look even better. But if you can get the PS2 version, definitely don't pass it up. I bet it will surprise you. So there you go, 10 games for the PS2 starting with the letter W that you may not have tried. Which one is your favourite and what other games could I have included? As always, let me know in the comments below. I really love getting your suggestions for games as they're often ones that I haven't heard of or wouldn't have thought to try. On screen now you can see where you can follow me, so why not do so? I've got plenty of content for everyone to enjoy. And now all that's left for me to say is thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time.